Hey Wranglers, how you doing? Good to see you again. It's been about a week since I've posted last. Had a lot of birthdays going on this week. Not me. I mean, I only have one birthday a year, but I mean, people I know had birthdays, so I participated in their celebrations and whatnot. But anyway, if you like my content, like, subscribe, and then the other thing I'd like you to do is tell a friend or something like that would be great. People seem to enjoy the stories, and building an audience here, and yeah, that's all I asked for. But anyway, uh, as far as that goes, today we're going to talk about the Butcher of Hanover. This man was a serial killer in Germany right before World War One. Now you normally don't think of serial killers in in times like that. I mean, we think of them more as modern phenomenon, and I don't think the term was coined until the 70s or something like that. But this man uh, was an active serial killer in the right before World War One, from 1918 to 1925, and during World War One. And I was going to make the point that even though this was a long time ago, his crimes were just as bad as some of the ones that we know about today. In league with like Jeffrey Dahmer and some of that. So this man's name is Fritz Harman, and he's also known as the Butcher of Hanover. He is known as the Vampire of Hanover and the Wolfman of Hanover. So I'll explain why that he's called that here in just a few minutes. Basically, he would abduct his victims, who were usually younger boys between 18 and 22, and he would sexually assault them and then murder them and mutilate their bodies and then dismember them. Now, I'll get into some of the details. So I want to make the warning right now. If you are bothered by gore or anything like that, do not don't. You probably want to watch something else. But this is um, this is a pretty interesting case that we're going to talk about right now. In fact, let me see what I've got here on the old slideshow. This is him. This is Fritz Harriman, or I don't know. I also read it some places as Friedrich Harriman is. I don't speak German and I don't know German culture. Is Fritz and Friedrich, are they like nicknames, like one's John or Jack? I mean, like the guy's name is Friedrich, so they call him Fritz for short. But most places I saw they call him Fritz Harriman. Anyway, his let's talk about his history here a little bit. As a child, he growing up, he was they called him noticeably effeminate, and he didn't like doing boy things, whatever those are. He liked to sew, he liked to cook, he liked to play with his sister's dolls, and he liked to dress in female clothing. This is when he was very young. Now, as Seinfeld said, not that there's anything wrong with that. I know a grown man that collects Barbies, and he's a decent human being. He's one of the nicest guys I know, and a very decent, low-key guy, and very, very sweet, very, but very friendly. Um, there's some of the best cooks in the world. He liked cooking. Gordon Ramsay's an example. He is of guys that like to cook. The best tailors are in London on Savile Row. They're the best, probably the best seamstresses or tailors or whatever you'd call them in the world, and that's something. And none of these people are probably like this guy was. I mean, they're all whatever you find interesting to do it. Is what I'm saying. And just because some people do some of the things that old Fritz here did doesn't mean that he has some of the same hobbies, or that kind of doesn't mean they're doing the bad things that Fritz did. So just keep that in mind. So this is Fritz, and this is how they described his behavior. His teachers talked about him in school. Okay, now in school they said that he was, how did they say this? Spoiled and mollycoddled. You see, as a person, probably by his mother. He was close with his mother. He was the youngest, and because he liked these things that his mother did, and he did them, the two of them became very close, and she tended to spoil him. So the teachers referred to him as spoiled, and this word is hard for me to say, mollycoddled. Um, and But there's a dichotomy here, and you're going to see this a lot in this guy's life. It's really interesting. A lot of opposites here. They said he was spoiled and mollycoddled, so you're thinking of a brat. No, they also said, but his behavior was exemplary. He was, he wasn't great at academics, but he was incredibly well behaved, and just a really, they said he was a good kid. He behaved perfectly, extremely well. So we have that going on there. There's a possibility that he was molested while he was at school. I couldn't find many resources that talk about that one at all, but I'm so saying it's possible that one of the teachers did this. Now he had a mean father who was also a womanizer, but the mother stayed with the father till she died. So I guess she's a better husband than a better wife than he was husband. And So that was kind of how basically how he was. And the dad sent him off to military school to toughen him up, when he was, or I guess around 16 or so. But and this happened to, thinking going to military school, a guy like this would hate it, being effeminate and all these kind. No, his commanding officer said he was an exceptionally good soldier. He was a great marksman, and he was basically he would describe this point of his life, this period of that he was in military school in the service, getting ready for the service, as the happiest time of his life. So we have another opposites kind of dichotomy here. However, he had to made him leave the service because he was having epileptic fits, which he would have seizures and pass out or whatever. They thought maybe he was having anxiety and faking it to get out of service, but no, the doctors discovered it was a real condition, so they let him out of the service and basically gave him a pension for this, and he moved on. But he was kind of he started after this. He started kind of getting into some shady things, con man, kind of a con man, kind of a burglar and a thief, working the system. And he ended up going to Switzerland, where he met this young lady here. Her name is Erna Lort. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but Erna, Erna Lort, Loewert. Pretty Swedish lady. I believe this is her. And they had an engagement. They got engaged, and she got pregnant. And when he found out she was pregnant, he returned to Germany to go back into the service. Well, they did allow him back into the service then, and for a while until this became, this other issue became a problem, where he just couldn't serve, and they basically described him as disabled. So, they couldn't expect him to continue to do this military service, and so he came back to Germany, back to Hanover, and where he continued his activities as a petty thief and a con man and a burglar. And which here's another interesting flip flop. Okay, he was doing all this stuff. He would get arrested from time to time. The long and short it was, eventually the cops came to use him, and they basically not made him, but he became an informant for the police um, in Hanover Station, and he would look for people who had invalid papers or whatever for travel, and then he'd let the police know, and the police would come arrest them, or he'd detain them, or what have you, and the police would come get him. And so he's kind of acting as a criminal and a policeman, but this didn't last a real long time because eventually his criminal activities outweighed his usefulness to the police, and they finally arrested him and threw him in jail for 5 years. Well, lucky for him, the uh, that 5 years was World War One, was during World War One, so he didn't go back to the service and have to go serve in the trenches or wherever. Um, I don't know if they would have let him anyway, but they were desperate for men, so they might have called him right back up. Now he basically, or should I say that um, they did. He served his time and they let him out. And let me see what we've got here. Oh, this is a picture of his apartment in Hanover, and you can see that river there. That river is going to come into play here pretty soon. That's the river called the River Lean, and I guess that's how you pronounce it. And it came right up to the back of his house. Now you look across the river there. You see the little boys in the foreground. Look across the river, and you see the buildings that are bordering the river. Those he had an apartment in one of those buildings right there on the river, so it was pretty going to be very useful for him. And this is about the same, right about this time is when he had his first victim, which was a 17-year-old runaway named Friedel Roth. Rota, Rota. I don't know how to pronounce it in German. It's Friedel, Fridel, Roth, Rothe. Like I don't know, like Goethe or Rota. I don't know. But anyway, this is the guy that he is first killed, and what he did is he got the guy to come back to his apartment. He started strangling him. Then he bends down and he bites his Adam's apple. He bites him right in the Adam's apple and tries to tear his throat open. Well, he bit him hard enough; it was bleeding and all that, and the strangulation killed him. But he had given the guy a damn good bite on the throat. Okay, and he then he went on to dismember and dispose of the body. Now, this is why that river becomes important. Is what he would do. Okay, warning. This is going to be kind of gory. He would cut the person open, put their guts in a bucket. He would chop off the. He would separate the arms from the torso up here at the shoulders, separate the legs. Then he would take a small knife, or he would decapitate the body. Then he would take a small knife and peel all the skin off of the head, where he then break open the back of the skull, dump the brain in a bucket, and then smash the rest of the skull, and trying to make it unrecognizable, I guess. They had some forensics back then, so this is his typical way of getting rid of the body. And with extra meat and all that other stuff that he didn't need, he tossed into this river. And we're gonna talk about that even more here in a little bit. So that was his very first. How did you say his first crime? Okay, his first victim, and so he was going to be one of many. They believe, and I'll get to this in a bit. He was convicted eventually of killing 24 people, and was put on trial for killing 27. Now this is Hans Gan. I say I get this guy's name right because it's uh, let me see here. Yeah. Um, okay. Um, this is not. This is great here. I'm sorry. His name was Hans Gans. Okay. And I'm sorry for the delay there. This was he was. I've read reports. I read in the research here. When he met Fritz, he was between 18 and 24, somewhere in that age range. I've seen 18. I've seen 24. Well, he meets Hans, and the two of them become lovers, homosexual lovers, and what you call it? Fritz continues this killing spree. In fact, this is right after World War One, when the Weimar Republic had kicked in, and that was a very bad time in Germany, where there was lots of poverty and lots of need and lots of want. Um, Fritz became popular as a butcher because a lot of times he'd take the meat from his victims if he had a victim, and he'd grind it up and make ground meat out of it, and he would sell that meat and tell people it was pork or something like that, and they would buy it and they would eat it, and I guess he would eat it too. But so he was selling people human meat. This isn't the first guy to ever do this. There's modern cases of this too, but he and Hans here would do that, and basically make part of their living that way. He had his pension, and that got raised because he was disabled, and he was selling his culinary delights, and also he'd take the personal effects of his victims, and some of them, some of these things that were really nice, he'd give to Hans here, and other ones he would sell or whatever, and he was still, still doing some of these things here, and yeah, Hans Grans. It was an R in there. That's why it rhymes. Um, so the two of them continued on. I said, and they're like, and the trial convicted him of 24 people, and I'll tell you about what happened to Hans Grans here in a minute. But how did he get caught? Well, one of the ways he got caught, one of the ways, the main way he got caught was he was walking through the Hanover train station, the place that he was the informant, used to be an informant at, and pull his little petty skins, and he had a 15-year-old boy with him. Now, the police's patience had run short with him by this time, and they stopped him and they asked him what's going on. He says, well, this kid hasn't got the right papers, and I was going to bring him to you guys and all that. And so they separated him. They pulled the kid aside and asked him, and the kid said, no, I did go over there, to his place, and he's been raping me the last 4 days. And I want to get away from him. I don't like this guy. This isn't what this isn't what I'm here for. To be messed, to have that happen to me. So the police, the antennas went off in their head, and their alert went off, and they started uh, in the investigation, as it were. They went to his apartment and they found Hans Grans there, and they found a bunch of the personal effects of the victims that they were looking for. Okay, of the 24 that had disappeared, they found a lot of the effects, their personal effects, in Fred, in the apartment there, where Fritz and Hans were living. So that gave him enough evidence to arrest him, and it didn't stop there. Then there was a place called the Cleve on that river that I showed you. Here they are. This is where a pantry where he kept his human meat that he would sell. You can even see the blood stains in there, and I don't know if this was a cold pantry or what. I don't know anything about that, but this is where he used to keep his cold meat. And this is the police finally arresting him, taking him up to the pokey. But let's go back over here to the yeah. This place had a place on it called the Cleve, and they went to inspect the Cleve. They started dragging the river, and there's a picture. And they found over 500 bones and body parts in that river. And now this isn't a place where people could commit suicide. It just wasn't tall enough. But this was downstream a little bit from his apartment. You can see there's ribs there. It looks like there's leg bones, maybe arm bones. Looks like some hip bones over here too, and some teeth. I don't know if those are teeth or not, but they literally be big teeth if those were ribs. But there's other things up there that vertebrae. They're probably vertebrae. So they found 500 different pieces of evidence, or 500 items in this river that probably didn't belong, that they were going to trace back to Mr. Fritz Harmon there. And so this is what they saw, and they put him on trial. And this is him. This is during the trial, and they did their thing, and they found him guilty of 24 out of 27, 23 of the accounts he was acquitted from, and he was given the death penalty. He was to be hung. No, excuse me, not hung, beheaded, head chopped off by the guillotine. And they also found Hans Grans guilty of one of the murders, and he was sentenced to death too. Now, when Fritz got sentenced to death, he stood up and he was not joyous, but he was like, "I deserve this. It's best if I'm out of society. I accept responsibility for what I've done, and I'm glad I'll be happily go to have put my head on the block, because that's what should happen." Now Hans Grans had the exact opposite reaction. He freaked out, didn't he panicked and all of that. But so that's how that's how that pass occurred. So they went ahead, and they were getting ready to do that. Here they are, poking around, looking for more evidence. They talk about this picture. They're looking for evidence of his first victim, but I doubt that. I mean, he would burn people in this oven here. Now, they were convicted. These guys were convicted on April 15th of 1925, and that's when the day that they were executed. And that morning, they got up at 6 a.m. Hans was let out, and he had his last words. He says, "I'm guilty, gentlemen. I am guilty, gentlemen. But as hard as it may be, I want to die as a man." And immediately put his head down in the guillotine. And then he says, "I repent." He goes, "But I don't fear death." And then they chopped his head off. Okay, I don't know what Hans Grans' last words were, but that was the last thing that Fritz said. And he knew he was guilty, and he was seeing this as a way to atone for all these crimes that he had committed. And now I got some interesting stuff. If you don't like gore, again, warning, gore warning, go away. Okay, go on out. Okay, so here we go. They preserved his head. This is Fritz's head here, and after they guillotined it, they saved it. The head of Fritz Harmon, and you can see, in this jar, this bell jar. I don't know if it's a bell jar or plastic or what it is, but it's been preserved, and so it's in a museum somewhere, and under the control of the German government. This is a close shot of his head with the, in that jar, and this is, but yeah, this is him. Uh, Probably today. He died. He paid for his crimes. Now, before he died, he also said that he goes. Not only did he admit to the 24 that he said he killed, he said he in his lifetime, or in his, I guess I don't want to call it a career, but in his killing spree throughout all those years, he said it wasn't 24. He goes, it was more like 50 to 70 that he had killed, somewhere around 70 people, which kind of makes sense if you think about how he was making part of his living selling meat. He had to keep this process up. And a lot of missing people in Hanover, and so he uh, probably killed around 70 people, 50 to 70 people, and um, I'm sure that Hans Grans was in on a bunch of it. So anyway, this is him. This is Fritz Harman, the Butcher of Hanover. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe, and I will see you next roundup, guys. Take care. Bye bye.